Okay, so welcome back from the break there. So let's continue on with our definitions. All right, now, next one is owner-operator. Now, some of you folks may be owner-operators, right? Excuse me. We have two different types that we want to point out here. We're going to make we're going to distinguish one from the other here. So the traditional owner-operator is an individual who owns his or her own truck and leases themselves and their equipment onto an authorized motor carrier. So you're an owner-operator, you own your own truck, and you lease onto Swift. Right? In that case, you're really operating under the authority of the motor carrier that you're leased onto. So you can't operate on your own. You got to hook up with a motor carrier. Leased owner-operator. The other type is independent owner-operator, and of course, in that case, you can operate on your own because you're operating under your own authority. Right? So here, this is the type of owner-operator that you as a freight broker can lawfully do business with. Whoever you choose to give your freight to has to have authority, presuming it's a regulated commodity, right? For hire, regulated transportation. So either you're dealing with Swift and they're going to dispatch the owner-operator, or you're dealing with an independent owner-operator. He'll furnish you with evidence of his active MC number. Okay. Now, when we talk about this term motor carrier authority, we already said it's like a business license, right? A grant of legal permission by a state or federal regulatory agency to transport regulated property for hire either within a state in terms of what we call intrastate transportation, or operating state to state, crossing state lines, which gets us into interstate transportation. So intra essentially means within, and inter means between or among states, right? Excuse me. Now, you have to make this distinction, and I got to tell you that I've had many people go through this class over the last 5 years or so. I must have done this class about 250 times at least. Usually we do about 50 of them a year. And I got to tell you that many times people who own trucking companies that come to this class because they're looking to launch their freight brokerage division don't know the difference between intra and inter. They think that once they get their US DOT number and their MC Federal Operating Authority number, that gives them the right to go anywhere in the country that they want. That is not true. In fact, because we live in a country that has a system called federalism, which has to do with a constitution that gives certain rights to the federal government and the rest are reserved for the states, right? There's two different levels of government. Because of that, there are two different types of motor carrier authority. There's the type that the federal government issues, and then there's the type that the state governments issue. Now, not all state governments choose to exercise their right to regulate. Some say they don't want to regulate. In fact, I was in Florida yesterday doing the program in Fort Lauderdale, and I had to tell that group of people that if you wanted to open up a trucking company and stay only within the state of Florida, you don't need to have state operating authority. Florida is one of a number of states that has chosen not to regulate. Okay? So basically, you need to know that there's a difference between federal and state, and then you need to know that certain states regulate and certain states don't. I think there's about 27 or 28 states that do regulate, the rest don't. Okay, so it's almost half and half. So if we're dealing with Georgia, Georgia regulates. Texas, Texas regulates. California, Pennsylvania, Chicago, they all regulate. New Jersey, nope. Florida, nope. Alaska, nope. So on and so forth. Okay?
But if the state doesn't regulate, if there is a requirement for them to have a federal DOT, then isn't it?
Yeah, the question was, well, what about the federal requirement to have a DOT number? That's not considered economic regulation. That's not considered regulating in the sense of licensing. It's regulating in the sense of safety. So when we talk about regulate, we really mean licensing. Okay, and you are correct. In fact, we pointed that out before. People in Florida that operate point-to-point within the state of Florida need to have a Florida federal, I should say a federal US DOT safety track. Okay, all right. Now, what that means to you is every time you're going to broker a load, you have to think very systematically. You have to think logically, right? The first question that you are going to always ask yourself is, number one, first and foremost, am I dealing with regulated transportation or exempt, right? If it's exempt, then you don't have to worry about anything else, okay? So is it fresh produce or is it canned corn, right? So presuming that it's regulated, then we go on to the next step. The next issue is, are we going to cross state lines or are we going to stay within a state with this load, right? So the essential question is, where are we going from and to? Are we crossing state lines or not? If we're crossing state lines, then we know that as a broker, we have to hire a trucking company that has a federal authority, an interstate authority. And the number that we're looking for in that case, of course, is an MC number, which stands for motor carrier number, okay? Federal license, federal operating authority. Used to be called ICC number or ICC/MC. Now we just call it MC, okay? All right. If we're staying within the state, the next question is which state? And ultimately, we need to know which states regulate and which states don't regulate, right? So if it's the state of Georgia, Georgia regulates. I've set up a website for you, and you're going to want to go ahead and check this out when you get home. It's www.iccauthority.net. In fact, what the heck? I'll pull it up on the internet here. Excuse me. iccauthority.net, not .com, .net. All right, and this is a website that I share only with my best of friends, so you're all within that category now, right? This is our secret discount website for getting a motor carrier authority, right? So, if you were to go click on Apply for Authority here, it would tell you the difference between federal and state. And in fact, as we scroll down here, it's getting all sorts of mad at me here, so let me close some stuff. Hold on one sec. Close that out. Okay. All right, so as we scroll down, it will tell you, it actually lists which states do require state operating authority. All right. Excuse me. 28 states. Oh, come on back up. There we go. Right? So if the state is listed, then the state requires operating authority if the trucking company operates point-to-point within that state. So is Georgia on the list? Yes, it is. Is Florida on the list? No, it is not. Okay, so therefore, that is in accordance with what I was just saying. All right, so once you know that, then the next thing to do would be to contact the state agency to find out if the trucking company you're looking to hire has the appropriate state license. And you can do that by going to the federal government website, which is www.fmcsa.dot.gov, www.fmcsa.dot.gov. Now, there's also a federal system. I'm going to show you that as well so that we can check when it's interstate transportation whether they have the federal operating authority. So that's going to be easy. So all you got to do is check the system for federal license. For the states, you got to call them, okay, and ask. All right, so very important for you to do this. Now, if you mess this up, folks, this could become a huge legal problem for you. I'll give you an example. Let's say that we have 3 shipments, and we're trying to arrange them in a logistical, sequential type of a way. We have shipment number 1 leaving Brooklyn, New York, and it's going to go to, let's say, Dallas, Texas. Shipment number 2 needs to be picked up at another point in Dallas, Texas, and it's going to go to Houston, Texas. And shipment number 3 is going to be picked up in a different point in Houston and go back to Brooklyn, New York. Okay? 3 separate loads, 3 separate shippers, 3 separate shipments, 3 separate bills of lading. Not one continuous bill of lading. This is not drop off, stop off, anything like that. They're all separate deals. Okay? It's going to be a little deadheading in between points, right, to pick up the next load. So we figure, well, if we're going to start in Brooklyn and we're going to end in Brooklyn, maybe we should try to find a trucking company that's based in Brooklyn. That makes sense, right? So that's what we do. So we call my old buddy from college, Michael Mazer. Michael inherited his father's company, Mazer Trucking, from what I understand. And so I call up Michael and say, hey, Michael, what do you think about doing these 3 loads for me, right? So he says, sure, no problem. So he'll go from Brooklyn to Dallas, pursuant to his federal interstate operating authority. Then he's going to pick up in Dallas and go to Houston, and then he'll come back, right? Now, when you set up a small or mid-sized trucking company in this country, usually what you do is you get the federal authority to go over the road, and you get the state authority, if it's required, for the state where you are based. So in this instance, Michael has federal operating authority, and he has New York State DOT operating authority. Sometimes he goes from New York to California. Sometimes he goes from New York City to Albany, New York, upstate, right, to Buffalo, to Binghamton, whatever. I think that's where I stopped you back in 94, something like that. Yeah, gave you a ticket, right? Okay. Say, after a while, if I repeat it enough times, the person walks out of the room saying, yep, he stopped me. Yeah, he gave me a ticket, right? It becomes reality, right? Okay. Now, what usually doesn't happen is the trucking company does not get state operating authority for all 28 states, right? Because it's not worth it to them. Now, the big companies, they have that. J.B. Hunt and Swift and Schneider, excuse me, but ultimately not the little guys. So the mistake that I made was I hired Michael to do 3 shipments when I should have only hired him to do 2, because what Michael doesn't have is Texas intrastate operating authority. And lo and behold, just my luck, that was the moment, right, when, or that was the shipment that was involved when Michael's truck unloaded in Dallas, went and picked up the next one. He's got the bill of lading showing intrastate transportation on board. Driver's got it on his clipboard. And here's the truck on its way to Houston, and that's when the accident happens. Couldn't be avoided. Nobody's fault. Nothing reckless or negligent. Just pure accident. Somebody gets killed. Go ahead. All right, we'll finish the story? Okay. Now, if somebody gets killed, is there going to be a lawsuit? If it's an accident involving a commercial motor vehicle, oh yeah, there's going to be a lawsuit. Who's going to get sued? Everybody's going to get sued. The driver's going to get sued. The motor carrier is going to get sued. And guess who else is going to be dragged in? The freight broker who arranged for the transportation. Now, can't you just picture this? It's a year later, and it finally comes to court, right? You're being sued by the family of the deceased person, and here you are in the witness stand. And here's the attorney for the plaintiff, right, who's suing you. And they get you on the witness stand, and they start cross-examining you, and they say, now, Mr. Lamb, isn't it true that you hired an illegal, unlicensed, uncertified, and arguably unsafe carrier to transport property within our good old state of Texas? And you, Yankee, you, right, from New York, right, you're going to be on trial there, basically, and you're going to respond, illegal. No, they're not. Well, they weren't illegal. They're not bad people. They're not. No, they're licensed. It's Michael. It's from college. My buddy. I know him for a long time. He's a good guy. And of course, I did my job. I checked, made sure he's got a good safety record, and he's got a license. See, I checked it in the FMCSA system. It said active. He was licensed, and so the attorney's going to come back and he's going to say, well, isn't it true, Mr. Lamb, that that license involves interstate transportation? So he was good to come into the state of Texas, but what about the state license? Humana. Isn't it true, Mr. Lamb, that he didn't have authority from Texas State DOT? Well, don't worry, Mr. Lamb. It's okay if you didn't check because we checked. We found out, we contacted the state of Texas, and we found out that on the date of the incident, Mr. Mazur did not have state of Texas operating authority. So given the fact that that's true, then isn't it also true, Mr. Lamb, as I said, that you hired an illegal, unlicensed, uncertified, and arguably unsafe carrier to transport property within the state of Texas? It's okay, Mr. Lamb. Isn't it also true that but not for the fact that you did that, well, my client's mommy would probably still be alive today. Now, once the jury hears that, or the judge, whatever type of trial it is, you're done, right? Might as well stick a fork in yourself because you're done, right? Okay. So that's the thing that you're trying to avoid. So not only do you have to make sure that they have operating authority, but you got to make sure that they have the right type of operating authority. And as I was saying before, sometimes people come to this class and they're motor carriers. Sometimes they're trying to launch a freight brokerage division. Sometimes they have no interest in launching a brokerage. They want to know what brokers know so they can adapt to that information and they can create counter tactics, right? Sometimes I have spies in my class and I can usually figure out who's a spy. Sometimes shippers come too, right? But basically, the motor carriers are looking to usually launch their own freight broker business. And when I say this, when I say there's difference between state and federal, some of them don't know. And some of them, I see them, actually, they start to get bright red in their face. One guy once got up, went outside, shut the door, and got on his cell phone, started screaming at his operations manager, saying, now let me get this straight. We've been in business for 12 years, and we don't know that we need a state license? We've been operating illegally all this time? You thought that the federal license covered everything? You're fired. Click. Comes back in the room, and then listens to the rest of the class. Right? So a lot of trucking companies don't even know this. Okay? But you need to know this because you have a due diligence obligation to hire a trucking company that has authority, not just authority, but the right type of authority. Any questions?
That particular license that you're talking about, the enter,
Mm-hmm.
you go from state to state to pick up the delivery. You just can't do this within that particular state, but you got to have an interstate.
You can come into the question basically is you can deliver, right, and pick up as long as one of the points involves crossing state lines. So the idea here is that if you're going to pick up and deliver in the same state, that's when state authority is required. Okay? So it has to do, it doesn't matter where you start from or where you finish in terms of being empty. All that matters is where you pick up and where you drop off. What are the 2 points that are on the bill of lading, right? So
The same story that took place down in the state of Florida with two different cities, it would have been okay.
yes, the question was, in the event that we were operating point to point within the state of Florida, we would be okay because we didn't need to have state operating authority because Florida doesn't regulate. Exactly. Somebody once asked me, all right, I live in Florida, so I cross over the border, right? I start my trip in Florida, I cross over and I pick up in Georgia, I drop off in Georgia, and then I come home. That's interstate transportation, right? Wrong. It's not interstate transportation because even though you cross the border, you cross empty. All that matters is where are you going from and to loaded, right? So if you start in Florida and you're deadheading to go and get the load, and the load pickup is in Georgia, and it's dropped off in Georgia, that's intrastate, and that's required. That means you're going to be required to have a state of Georgia authority, okay? It's also not drop-off. Yes?
Okay, so if I leave Georgia and I pick up in Chattanooga, well, I mean, I'll pick up in Georgia and go to Chattanooga, drop off in Chattanooga, and go somewhere else, and 20 minutes away in Chattanooga and bring that back to Georgia. Is that interstate?
Well, and I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're gonna pick up in Georgia. You're gonna go to Tennessee, right? You're gonna drop off in Tennessee. Then you're gonna deadhead, not loaded, to another point in. That's the key word, right? To another point in Tennessee, and you're gonna drop off in Georgia. Both of those are interstate transportation. You're allowed to drive around in the state. You just can't transport property within the state. And that's provided that you are duly permitted to be in those states to begin with, right? You got your IRP registration, you're plated for those states, you're paying your fuel tax with respect to those states. If they're one of the special states, you have the specific mileage tax, like Kentucky has KYU and New York has HUT, so on and so forth, okay? But keep in mind that what I gave you was 3 separate loads in that original example, right? Brooklyn to Dallas, Dallas to Houston, Houston back to Dallas, or back to Brooklyn, I should say. What I did not say is that it was going to be, let's say, one bill of lading going from Brooklyn to Dallas, stop, drop off half the load, and then drop the other half off in Houston. That would be one continuous run, all on one bill of lading, okay? So it's very important that you understand that we're talking about picking up and dropping off, either crossing state lines or staying within a state. That's all that counts, okay? Any other questions? Good questions. Okay.
Does that tie in with apportionment?
Sorry?
Does that tie in with apportionment tags?
Apportion tags basically means you have the right to travel through a state, all right? But it doesn't mean you have the right to pick up and drop off within that state. Right, so sometimes people will, let's say if you're operating a trucking company out in California, you're going to plate yourself for 11 western states or something like that. Every once in a while you want to go to the East Coast, then you got to get a trip permit, right? And you actually then get extended authority for just that trip to go through certain states. Being able to pass through a state is not the same as operating point to point within the state. Okay? That's when we're dealing with operating authority. So keep permitting separate from authority. All right. So that's motor carrier authority. Broker license, a grant of legal permission by the federal government to arrange for the transportation of property by motor vehicle as a third-party intermediary. Notice we're talking about federal government. We don't have the same degree of a dichotomy, if you will, as we do with motor carrier. We're really focused on inter versus intra when it comes to motor carrier because there's 28 states that regulate. But when it comes to brokering, well, the intra component of brokering is really incidental. And the reason why is there's only 3 states in the country that actually regulate intra-state brokering activity. So what we're saying here is that in general, if you're going to arrange for transportation, if that transportation is going to cross state lines, you got to have a federal broker license. You're brokering freight from Georgia to Florida, right? That's required to have a federal license. The question becomes, at what point do I need a state broker license if I'm going to arrange for transportation point to point within a particular state? Only 3 states require this. The state of Illinois is one of them. So if you're going to broker freight from Peoria, Illinois, where they hold the Midwest Truck Show every February, I think it is, a little regional truck show. I've been to a couple of times. To Chicago, in that case, then you have to have a state of Illinois broker license issued by the Illinois Commerce Commission. Okay? Virginia is the other one. Virginia, you wind up, have a seat anywhere you like there. Virginia, you wind up, same situation. You need to have a state of Virginia license. And I'm going to tell you that with respect to Illinois, Illinois has a $10,000 bond, just like the federal government does for brokers. Virginia has a $25,000 bond. Okay. I'm going to also tell you that Florida has a requirement that if you're going to arrange for the transportation of household goods broker, then you have to have a household goods broker license, and they too have a $25,000 bond requirement. Now, let's talk about the bond. The bond, we'll focus on the federal bond here because that's what we're really here to talk about. The bond is the financial security that is required of a broker. Just like a motor carrier has to have insurance, they have to have liability insurance for their vehicle and cargo insurance for the cargo, for the shipper's shipment. So too, financial security has to be on file with the federal government for brokers, and it's in the form of a surety bond. Now, the whole purpose of the bond is to really make sure that the broker meets his responsibilities to the shipper. He makes the truck actually show up when he says it's going to show up. And more importantly, he pays his carrier at the end of the deal. We're going to take a look at the flow chart in just a moment as to how the typical transaction works. But for now, let's focus in on this bond. This bond is not your average business bond. There's a lot of companies that are out there, or I should say a lot of jobs or positions that are out there that if you want to get into the business, then you have to actually get a license and a bond. So, for instance, let's say that I'm thinking of the old TV show from the 1980s, right? Magnum PI, remember that program? Who was the actor in that? Tom Selleck, right? He was the guy with the Detroit Tigers hat. He drove the red Ferrari, right? And drove around the islands, right? He had Higgins and TC and all those guys. Remember that, right? Yeah, Higgy Baby, right? Remember that? Some of you are not old enough to remember that, I guess, right? All right, well, I remember that show. What was his occupation? He was a private investigator, right? So let's say that you want to get into the daring business of private investigations, and let's say you're based in New York. If you want to get a PI license, you have to get it from the Department of State, and you have to pass a test for that, and then ultimately you have to be licensed and bonded. So you got to get a $10,000 surety bond for that business. That business is a low claims activity business. Not many people file claims against a private investigator, right? Usually a private investigator gets hired, he does his job, and there's no problem, right? However, in this business, in freight brokering, there are claims that are filed against brokers all the time. Why? Because many times, very often, they don't pay their carriers. Okay? So because of that, there's an excess cost associated with administering the bonds, and so the premium is higher. To give an example of how different, a 2-year bond for private investigator in New York will run you about $100 to $175 in that range. A 1-year bond for a freight broker will run from $350 to $550 for the year. So it's more expensive. Now, with that said, here's what's going on in the industry right now. Over the last 6 years, there is a trade group that represents our friends, the owner-operators, right? And it's called OOIDA. How many of you are familiar with that? You know OOIDA? Some of you are card-carrying members, I'm sure, right? OOIDA, or OIDA, back in 2004, went to the government, the FMCSA, within the U.S. DOT, and they basically said, now, this $10,000 bond that's supposed to protect us as owner-operators, independent owner-operators, when we work directly with brokers, not working out too well for us. Because very often, broker goes bad, and there's so many claims that are filed, there's not enough money to cover the amount that the carriers need to be paid. So once the bond is depleted, then the owner-operator is out of luck. And his only recourse then is to sue. He'll probably win. He'll have to go through the whole trouble of going to court. He'll get a judgment. The fact that you get a judgment, does that mean that you're necessarily going to collect? No. Most of the time, in fact, you don't see the money, right? So the problem becomes $10,000 is not enough money. So OOIDA went to FMCSA in 2004 and said, raise the bond. Guess how much they asked the government to raise the bond to? Anybody know? Keep going. Not quite $1 million, $500,000, between $350,000 and $500,000. Now, if a $10,000 bond costs $500, what do you suppose a $500,000 bond would cost? All right, $25,000, right? Huge increase. Now, the government just kind of brushed it aside. They said, we're not doing that. What they did do is they decided that they were going to look at household good brokers and they were going to think about whether to raise the bond on those brokers. And that's because in this day and age, in this deregulated environment, the government cares about two things. One is safety, first and foremost, and you know CSA 2010 initiative and all that, right? And the second is consumers. And consumers has to do with moving, okay? So those are the two top priorities. So the government looks at brokers only in the sense of household goods brokers, people that are moving through brokers. So what they did in 2007 is they said, well, we're going to open up rulemaking, which means they're thinking about changing the rules. And ultimately, we'll consider a $25,000 bond because the bond has not gone up since 1977, I believe it was, which means here we are 30 plus years later, and the bond that was originally set at $10,000 has never gone up. So if we adjust just for inflation, then $10,000 should become $25,000. That's their thought. That's their logic. And I think, and my association thinks that that's an appropriate adjustment. OIDA is not happy with that. OIDA still was pushing for $500,000. Now, there's an existing trade group within the industry that was up until July the only trade group that existed for freight brokers, and it's called TIA, otherwise known as Transportation Intermediaries Association. Now, in 2004, the president of TIA, Bob Voltman, did the right thing, in my opinion, and he stood up and he said, no, raising the bond's not going to fix the problems that you people are having. The problem is that you need to check the credit, right, of the broker before you do business with them, make sure you're not falling into a trap, and we need to really worry about the illegal brokers. We got to make sure that we enforce the law and make sure we crack down on the bad guys because the illegal brokers aren't bonded to begin with. Right? So they don't even have a $10,000 bond. That's where the focus is. That's where the fraud in the industry is. Well, over the last 6 years, TIA has changed its business structure. And what I mean by that is it started to offer bonds. It started to sell bonds on its own above and beyond the $10,000 requirement. And essentially what it did was it went to the big brokerages, who are the true constituents of TIA because they pay the most money. For instance, you would pay $600. C.H. Robinson would pay $14,000 per year. And they basically said to the big brokerages, hey, how about we do this? How about to get you more business, taking the business away from the little guys, we make a new bond that's $100,000. And that will enable you to distinguish yourself from the little guys. Oh, those little guys have $10,000, but we're C.H. Robinson and we have $100,000. And so they created this, and they started to give out this bond certificate to all of these big brokerages. And then when it came down to this fight with OOIDA, OOIDA said $500,000. TIA went back and said, well, how about $100,000? The same amount that they were already selling. Now, TIA purports that it represents all brokers. In January, they released a press release that said they agreed with OOIDA that it should be $100,000. They went to Congress. They told Congress, since the government FMCSA agency is not doing anything, you need to do something, and we need to raise the bond to $100,000. They asked for a bill that would eventually become law to raise it to $100,000. And at that point in time, when I saw that press release, my heart started pounding because I said, oh no. I said, you know what this is going to do? It's going to devastate the industry. In fact, I wrote this article that I've given you here that's in your packet that warned Congress to tread lightly on this issue. And my argument was, if you raise the bond from $10,000 to the agreed upon amount of $100,000, what you're going to do is you're going to put all the small brokers out of business. And when you do that, you are going to prevent new people also from becoming brokers, and you're going to give the market over to the big brokerages. And once the big brokerages own the market, the same people who asked for this $100,000 bond are going to realize they're going to realize it's too late, that they just shot themselves in the foot. Because here's an owner-operator 2, 3, 4 years down the road, after all the little guys are out of business, he's looking for a load on the backhaul, and he's going to go up to one of the remaining few big brokerages, and he's going to say to C.H. Robinson, "May I please have a load, sir?" And they'll say, "Sure, you can have a load. Here you go. It pays 96 cents a mile." 96 cents a mile? I can't do business for 96 cents a mile. Sorry, that's what it pays. You could go to our competitor, Landstar, but I hear they're paying 92 cents a mile. And that's going to be the choice for owner-operators. So I said to Congress, don't do this. I said, this is going to have a devastating impact. The only people who win as a result of this are the big brokers. Shippers are probably going to pay more to the big brokerages because they don't have any opportunity. They don't have any choice. The big brokerages are going to keep that additional profit, and they're going to pay the truckers less. So carriers lose, owner-operators lose, shippers lose. The only people who win are the big brokerages and TIA that's already selling the $100,000 bond. So the way this played out is that article got published and disseminated around the industry. And then the next thing that happened was in June, 2 senators, led by Olympia Snowe out of Maine, I believe it is. I can't even pronounce the name of the other one, out of Minnesota, I think. Klochabar or something like that. The 2 of them, what they did was they co-sponsored a bill that would raise the bond to $100,000. And they called it the Motor Carrier Protection Act of 2010. 2 weeks later, we formed the Association of Independent Property Brokers and Agents, the equivalent to OOIDA in the trucking industry for brokers. And we said, oh no, hell no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to let you just say, TIA, that you represent all the brokers and that this is a good thing. We think it's not a good thing. And so we've stood up at this point. We've created this new trade group. And when TIA went and did its webinar as to how wonderful this was, the next day we went and did our webinar, and we said, no, it's not. Not so fast. And so there have been a lot of articles about this in the industry that you can read up on. If you just plug in AIPBA up on the Google or Yahoo, you'll see all of these articles about how the 2 broker groups are fighting. We have been in existence for 90 days. We now have 100 members. 100 people have come to us and said, you're right, this is going to kill us all. So as you start your small brokerage, I highly recommend that you look at our website, independentpropertybrokers.org, www.independentpropertybrokers.org, and you check out what we're doing to protect the interests of small brokers. In fact, I would even invite you to join. Okay. Now, I'll leave you with one last thing. Within the last 30 days, I challenged the president of TIA, who I've met before in the past, Bob Voltman, to a debate. And I said, you think this is a wonderful thing, and you put up your webinar. We think it's a horrible thing, and we put up our webinar. I said, why don't we meet in Fort Lauderdale at the industry meetings, right? Essentially the shipper meetings down in Fort Lauderdale in November, and let's have a public debate. Let's talk the points for the edification of everybody in the industry. TIA declined to debate, all right? Because I think TIA knows that we have the winning case. Now, in the meantime, Voltman and I have been debating anyway on a special website called Washington Watch, which is a website that obviously watches what's going on in Washington. So if you go to Google and you put in Washington Watch and the bill number, which is 3483, that'll pop up. Washington Watch 3483, or you can even get there from independentpropertybrokers.org. And in that case, you could see what Mr. Voltman has to say. You could see what I say in response, what he says. So we did a virtual debate anyway, all right? And ultimately, there are people posting on there that are making comments as to what they think. I highly recommend you read all the comments and then post what you think in terms of whether you think this is a good thing or not. We also have a letter writing campaign that's going on right now as AIPBA. You can go and download the template that says, I'm thinking about becoming a broker, and this would be very bad for me and other people in the industry. This would hurt me. The people who were sponsoring this bill were trying to protect the interests of small truckers. That's really what they were doing. And they got bamboozled into creating a bill that ultimately will protect big brokerages. And OIDA doesn't even see it. And with all due respect to OIDA, I think that now they know that we've made a point that this would hurt the little people in trucking. So it's not about broker versus carrier. It's about big broker versus little guy in trucking. Whether you're a broker or an owner-operator, it's going to hurt you, right? So the old saying is big brother is watching you, right? Well, big broker, we're watching you is our response. So we highly recommend you join this association. The more members we have, the better chance we have at defeating this. We're creating a whole campaign. We're contacting every broker in the United States, 20,000 brokers, asking them to join us and fight this legislation. We're going to send a lobbyist down to Washington, and we're going to actually try to get them all to see what this is really about, right? And I can say that I think TIA is pulling the wool over Congress's eyes here and tricking them into doing this. And of course I can say that because my last name is Lamb. Pulling the wool over. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll throw a joke at it every once in a while. All right, any questions about the bond or AIPBA's efforts or anything like that? You can go onto that website and listen to these webinars. They're all recorded. You can understand what our position is. We think it is time for the bond to go up because of inflation. In fairness to OOIDA, they have a point, but it's got to be limited. So we think Virginia has the right idea. We think Florida has the right idea, $25,000. FMCSA is talking about changing it for household goods brokers. Well, maybe they ought to change it all across the board and do $25,000 instead of $10,000. We also came up with an alternate plan, and that plan is, how about we scale the bond to brokers' revenues? There's an idea. In fact, ironically, it's the same thing that TIA does. You want to be a member of TIA? Well, you got to pay us a membership fee based on how big you are. If you're huge, you pay us $14,000. If you're mid-size, you pay us $7,000. And if you're small, you pay us $600 a year because that's what you can afford. Same policy. Just apply it to the bond. So if you're a startup broker, how about we leave it at $10,000 because you're just getting started. How much carrier money could you possibly handle when you're first starting out? Once you grow to, let's say, beyond $500,000, well, then maybe it goes up a little bit, right? And so we would have structured scales so that we would divide the whole industry into small and big. And if you're small, at various different increments, you'd have a $10,000 bond or $25,000, $50,000, $75,000. In all cases, our membership, our small brokers, would still have less than $100,000, and then the big brokers can have $100,000. In fact, the multi-billion-dollar companies that are public, maybe they would have a $250,000 bond. OIDA would like that because that gets back closer to $300,000 to $500,000 that they originally asked for. So if you follow this debate, it's very interesting. And you need to know that this is going on because if this happens, even if you get into business now, this will affect you 3 or 4 years down the road because that's the intended effective date. Okay? So I don't want to scare you away, but at the same time, if you join us, we have a really good shot at trying to get this changed and having them amend the bill so that they reduce the amount, okay, or adopt our structure that we've recommended. Right now, the bond, I'll tell you what the various different plans are. There are 2 ways to get a bond. One is by putting down cash collateral, and the other is by doing a credit-based program. So I'll go through what the options are, but essentially you need to know that the administrative fee is usually about $500 or so. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the bond. All right. Now let's go on here and let's chat about a few other things. Now, let me show you the broker transaction. There are 3 phases to this transaction. Number 1 is called the order for service. So among these 3 players, here's the deal. We have a shipper, otherwise known as a manufacturer, that has manufactured product. In fact, the one that comes to mind is Bacardi, or if you're in Puerto Rico, Bacardi. as they say, right? I was down there 2 days ago, and I went to the Bacardi plant. I actually toured the facility. And so here they have all this property or all this rum that needs to be shipped, right? So they go to a broker and they say, find me trucks. So the broker then goes out into the industry and finds the carrier. Of course, the broker agrees with the respective parties on rate, right? They negotiate, and they have the specific contracts in place for both sides. The carrier then goes and performs the transportation, transports the rum, and in that case, reports back to the broker who hired him and says, all right, you asked me to do this, right? I did it, and here's proof that I did it. Here is a signed or executed bill of lading, right? Here's the signature of the receiver of the shipment, what we call the consignee. Consigner is the shipper, consignee is the receiver, all right? So now the broker says, okay, that's great, thank you, and I'll be back with you in a little bit. Broker then sends a business invoice to his shipper. Now, note here, please, that a broker never sends his own bill of lading to a shipper. You should not ever do that. If you do that, that brings us back to the theory of imposed liability, right? The way this works is the courts have decided that any time the broker issues a shipping document himself, he has misrepresented himself as the carrier. And if you're going to represent yourself as the carrier, well, then logic would dictate that you should be held liable as if you were the carrier. So the judges impose liability on brokers for shipments that they don't normally have because they issued the wrong shipping document. So you should issue a standard business invoice, and you can use QuickBooks to generate that, right? We've given you a sample of what that document looks like. I'm sure you've all seen invoices before, and ultimately that's all you do, all right? Do not issue your own bill of lading. You'll receive a bill of lading from the carrier, but as a broker, you just issue a standard business invoice, all right? Once the shipper gets that invoice, in that case, excuse me, the third phase is payment. Now we're talking about the shipper paying that bill, that invoice, paying the broker, and the broker then, of course, needs to do what? Pay the carrier. In fact, you'll notice that of all the things that are up on that board there, the word broker and carrier under payment is in red. That's to illustrate that that is the purpose, the true purpose of a bond. In the event that the broker does not pay, the carrier has a built-in recourse through the regulatory scheme where he can file a claim against the broker's bond with the bonding company. Hey, bonding company, I did work for this guy and he didn't pay me. Here's proof I did it, my bill of lading. I want you to pay me out of the bond. And that's what usually will happen. Once the broker's bond is reduced, the broker has a responsibility to put more money in. He's got to keep it at $10,000. If he fails to do that, the bond gets canceled. If the bond gets canceled, what else gets canceled? The license. Okay? Yes, sir. The question is, if the broker does not pay the carrier because the shipper did not pay the broker, right, does the bonding company go after the shipper? The answer is no. The shipper is not regulated in this instance. The only two parties that are regulated out of the three are broker and carrier. You have to be performing transportation or arranging for transportation in order to be regulated. Okay. Now, here's the situation. The broker is bonded for the protection of the carrier. Is the shipper bonded for the protection of the broker? No. And that is your dilemma. Okay. Now, this is probably one of the most important things we're going to talk about today, and it has to do with the number one thing that can go wrong. We'll talk about pitfalls, right? The worst thing that can happen to you when you are a broker is the shipper does not pay. because the premise that this gentleman had a moment ago is understandable, but it's a little misguided. What I mean by that is the statement was, if the broker doesn't pay the carrier because the shipper doesn't pay the broker, that's not the way it works. No matter what, the carrier's getting paid. The carrier's going to either get voluntarily paid or is going to get paid out of the bond, which means that if you're a broker and you don't get paid, you still have to pay your carrier. Otherwise, the money will come out of the bond, and then you'll be put out of business if you don't replenish. Okay? So you got to be very concerned about that, because that's the worst thing that can happen to you as a freight broker. Okay? The only recourse is to sue the shipper, and like I said, you might get a judgment, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to collect the money. Okay? So what you need to do is do your diligence for your own well-being and make sure that anytime you're thinking about working with a shipper, you check their credit rating. We'll tell you how to do that a little bit later on. All right? And one of the arguments that the small brokers are using right now as to why the bond should not go up is because they say, what about the shipper having a bond? Right? The shipper has no bond. Right? What happens when the shipper doesn't pay me? I still have to pay the carrier. That's not fair. Sometimes I don't get paid. So sorry, carrier, but you're going to just have to deal with it the way it is. That's basically the error. Okay. So, number one worst thing, shipper does not pay. Now, I've told you who I am. I've told you a little bit about Excelsior Logistics, right? I want to make sure I have an understanding of who you folks all are. So one of the things I usually ask here is, how many people already have a freight broker license? Anybody? Anybody got an MC number as a broker? No? Anybody ever work as an agent for a broker before? Kind of did the apprentice kind of thing? No? How many people here are company drivers? You drive a company truck, okay? How many people here are owner-operators leased onto a carrier? Anybody? Okay. How many people here have their own authority? They have their own MC number for motor carrier authority. All right. How many people here are vice president of a huge trucking company, like operations or something like that? No fleet people here? Every once in a while, you know, the president of J.B. Hunt himself comes to one of my classes to learn how to do trucking. He usually sits front row, usually at the end of the table there. He couldn't be with us here today. So he sends his regards. He's out playing golf. And if you believe that, I got a bridge over in Brooklyn to sell you over there, right? Forget about it. Okay. How many people here from outside the trucking industry have nothing to do with transportation? Okay. Now, for you folks, you have good company, because what's going on over the last few years is a lot of people are coming from outside because they have heard that this is one of the top 10 businesses to start in the United States, according to Entrepreneur Magazine. Now, that's not my marketing that's out there. That's them. They have independently rated this business, and they said, you know what? This is a great business to start because it's low startup cost. You can start up this business for a couple of $1,000s. You can operate from home, so it's low overhead, low operating cost, and you have the potential to make big money. How much money? I told you, you're all worth $200,000 each if you have the average skill set that most brokers have. Okay? Within the last 5 years, we have gone from being the 5th best business to start, according to their top 10 list, to guess what? Number 2. We are the 2nd best business to start in the United States. There's only one other business. I know you want to know, right? What's number 1? Right? I can hear that question coming. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you at the end of the day, because I want to make sure you all come back from lunch. I want to make sure you don't disappear on me. A little cliffhanger there, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Think about that. But number 2 is pretty darn good, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up topping the chart within the next couple of years, especially as the recession ends and the recovery sets in. Now, the next question here is not who are you, but who do you want to be? And I got to tell you, folks, I love my job because I get to travel all around the country, meet nice folks just like you from all different walks of life, all different regions of the country. I've been all over the country. I've been to Las Vegas. I've been to Orlando. I've been to the Grand Canyon. I've been to Niagara Falls. Right? Do programs in all these cool areas. I've been to Stone Mountain here, right? And I get to do for you what I did for myself, which is help you get on the path to becoming an entrepreneur. And that's really what this class is about. It's about building a business for yourself so that you can improve the quality of life for yourself and your family. And every time I get to this point in the program, I always remember where I came from. I used to work for somebody else. In fact, I used to work for the state. I used to work for the government. And I got to tell you, I did not make a lot of money working for the state as a civil servant. In fact, I always remember back to my last year of working for New York DOT, and I think back to how much money I made. And do you know that I still remember my exact salary amount from 15 years ago? I made in my last year $32,877 a year. I lived in New York City. You try living in New York City on $30,000 a year. I lived in a small little box with bars on the window, not a very great place to live, high crime area. And ultimately, I sat there thinking one day, how am I going to raise a family, get married on this income, living in this environment? I said, this is not going to work. Got to do something else. Got to make some changes here. The last year that I worked for the DOT, I remember New Year's Eve. I had my girlfriend over, my then girlfriend, over my apartment in my one-bedroom apartment. And you know what we did for New Year's Eve? We watched Dick Clark and the ball drop on television. Now, here I am in the greatest city of the world, New York. We didn't even have enough money to go to Times Square to enjoy New Year's Eve, right? Because it cost too much money. So all we could do is have a little popcorn and peanuts and watch Dick Clark on TV, drink some Peel's beer. I don't know what you know about Peel's beer, but not good stuff, right? Now, things have changed. Life has gotten better. I've become an entrepreneur. I have my own business. I have my own businesses. You know what I did for New Year's last couple of years? Paris. Now, I said that in Texas the other day. Woman raises her hand. Paris, Texas? No, not Paris, Texas. The real Paris. Paris, France. Vive la France. I went to Paris, France for a week with my then girlfriend. And we wound up taking a riverboat cruise on the Seine River. We're all dressed up in tuxedo and evening gown. We're not drinking Peel's beer. We're drinking champagne. And at that point, at exactly midnight, the boat stops. We toast our champagne right by the Eiffel Tower. Fireworks. Now, does it get any more romantic than that, ladies? Come on. You guys got it going on if he takes you to Paris for New Year's, right? Okay. Now, the idea here is not to flaunt money. And the idea here is not to talk about spending $10,000 on a trip. The idea is to talk about the difference in quality of life and to talk about what's really important, which is taking action now to plant seeds that will eventually grow so that you can improve the quality of your life for you and your family. If your child in 5 years, 10 years, wherever you are in your life, can get into Harvard University, which costs a lot of money, wouldn't it be great if we had the resources to send her to Harvard? Right? Our child's going to Harvard. No holds barred. Right? That's the idea. So in order to get there, we got to talk about becoming entrepreneurs. And with that comes a certain responsibility, leadership. Because when you become a freight broker, you become a leader by default. There are going to be owner-operators that are going to come to you for loads. You need to lead them in the right direction. Right? They can't do this themselves. They need help. They need you. They need a load on the backhaul. So we have to have a definition for leadership. Ours is, leadership is not necessarily knowing the answer, but knowing where to find the answer. You folks are all here to find some answers to some questions you have about freight brokering. Excelsior is your source for answers, your online authority on transportation business licensing. All right, natural progression. This is called the entrepreneur's career path in trucking. Now, for those of you who are already in trucking, most of you, I would suggest there's a path that inevitably, if you follow it, will wind up making you into a freight broker. Now, I sometimes at this point look at my own path and I say, how did I get to where I am? And I usually think about where I started and then the steps that I took. So, for instance, I left the DOT and I started this small little consulting firm. Over time, the consulting firm grew. First, it was just me as a consultant. Next thing you know, I have 20 people working for me in 2 different offices around the country. Next thing you know, we're launching a brokerage. Next thing you know, we're doing freight broker training. Next thing you know, I'm the president of a trade group. I had no intention of doing that, but I got pulled in that direction. Why? Because very often when you start one business, your clients pull it out of you. The reason why we're here today is not because I decided I wanted to get involved in freight broker training. It's because I started off a business where I helped people get their trucking company set up. And then some people came to me and said, well, what about a freight broker license? And I said, what is that? And they said, well, you know, it's third-party intermediary. So I had to go do research. And then I wound up figuring out where it was and how to get that license. And then I helped people from that point get that license. And then people came to me and said, well, what about training? Thanks for getting me the license. Now what do I do? And I said, well, you know, there's a book by Entrepreneur Magazine. Go read the book. They went and read the book. They came back. That's not enough. It's just a broad overview. What about real training? So then I partnered with these other schools, 5-day programs. Of the programs that are out there, I've been partnered with 2 of them in the past. The third one I was about to partner with, and then I said, no, I'm going to go in a different direction. We're going to do a summarized version of freight broker training that's low cost, because a lot of people need that. The reason why we did it is because people asked us to do it. So that's what will happen to you. You'll start a freight brokerage. You'll think, I'm only going to do truckload. Next thing you know, too many people are asking for less than truckload. Now you got to go back to class and figure out less than truckload. Next thing you know, it's not only domestic, but it's international. Well, I guess I got to get a freight forwarder license. What's that good-looking guy's name from the seminar that I went to? James, what's his phone number, right? He said he can get me an ocean intermediary license, right? I'm going to call James, get that license, right? And it all just develops that way. So if you're starting off in trucking, you got to start somewhere, right? You start off as a company driver. What happens after you've been a company driver for a little while? You get sick and tired of forced dispatch. I remember at this point in the year, about 5 years ago, remember what was happening 5 years ago right now? Think back. 2005, September. Well, I'm thinking more about a catastrophic, a natural event that occurred. Hurricane Katrina. You remember what life was like for those people down in New Orleans? You know what the big business in trucking was at this point in time 5 years ago? FEMA contracts, transporting trailers down to the affected areas so that people could live in them temporarily until they could rebuild. That was the big contract. So if your trucking company that you work for as a company driver could get one of those contracts, then they were going to send you where? To ground zero. That's where. To this lawless place where people were killing each other in the streets, snipers on the roof, people looting. Police couldn't control the area. People were jammed into this convention center, killing each other there. It's the last place I would want to go. But guess what? I got a job. I got to go where my boss tells me to go. It's forced dispatch. A lot of people, after that experience, so I'm never doing that again. I'm going to save my money. I'm going to go buy a truck. Big day when a company driver becomes an owner-operator, you betcha. Got myself my nice Peterbilt, shine the bumpers, right? All the chrome. At that point, that's inevitably where somebody will go to a truck show looking for a company to lease onto, recruiter, and instead of going to the recruiter booth, they'll bump into me. And you know what I say? I say, what are you doing? Now, let me get this straight. You took one step in the right direction by getting your truck. Now you got all these expenses associated with operating the truck, and that's where you stay? You're just going to stop there? What about the next step? You know, the one where you get the business license that enables you to cut out the middleman, be your own boss, and make more money? How about taking that step? How about getting your authority? Why should you get just a portion of the freight rate when you can get all the money? Right? I don't need a middleman. I'll be my own company. So I take on a few more functions, right? Sales, marketing, customer service, billing, right? My wife will help me. She'll be my dispatcher. She'll do all that stuff. Maybe I'll send her to freight broker training school and we'll be a team, right? When you become an independent carrier, at that point you're at the fork in the road. Either you stay small, a one-man trucking company, which is fine, if that's what you want, or you say, oh no, hell no. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a trucking company. You watch out, J.B. Hunt, because here I come. I'm going to take the profit from my first truck, right? I'm going to reinvest it, buy another truck. I'm not going to Paris this year. It's coming soon, not this year. Next thing you know, I got a company driver working for me. And as I start to develop and get better at sales and marketing, next thing you know, I got enough freight for more than just my 2 trucks. Now I got to have an owner-operator or 3 lease on to me, to my authority. And at that point, once they get really good, they realize that they can't handle all the freight coming at them, assuming the economy cooperates. And the next thing you know, they have to start outsourcing freight to other duly licensed motor carriers. That's why a lot of folks are here today, because they're in that position. Because there's a trucking shortage right now. There's too much freight relative to the amount of trucks that are available. And we will see that. We will see the evidence of that when I pull up the tool that shows us the load-to-truck ratio. Most of the time, some states have more trucks. Some states have more loads. Things are unbalanced in particular states, but in general, as a nation as a whole, it's pretty balanced. Half of the time, the truck needs the load more than vice versa, and vice versa. Right now, everything, with the exception of one state, which is the state of Florida, which is traditionally a problem state in terms of getting freight out, right? Low manufacturing base. Every state, the load-to-truck ratio is on the trucker's side. That means the trucker has the power. That means shippers can't find truckers right now, and they need brokers more than ever. And that's what you will see. If you've been thinking about becoming a freight broker, don't play. Just do it. Do it right now. Do it today. In fact, I'm going to have Yana in the back available to you to actually take your applications so that you can start the process. It's going to take 3 weeks for the license to go through. 3 to 4 weeks is the licensing processing time, because there's a built-in waiting period. We'll talk about that. But if you do it today, you can be up and running for November, right? So that you can take advantage of the normal holiday increase, retail sales, as well as this wave of tsunami demand that's going to hit, because right now things are starting to go up like this. As freight volumes continue to rise, the trucking companies, the industry is trying to catch up with capacity, but every time they go up one, freight volumes go up one. So there's still a disparity. And until such time as it equals out, there's going to be serious opportunities for freight brokers to make a lot of money real quick. Don't miss the boat. Do it now, and hopefully within the next quarter, you'll make a lot of money real fast. Okay? All right. So once they start to outsource, what did they become? They became a freight broker, right? Okay. Other people go right to freight broker, and as long as you lay the firm foundation that you guys are doing here today, there's no problem with that. We're getting you all both up to speed there in terms of all this basic stuff. Now, why would you want to be a freight broker? Why would anybody want to be a middleman? Who would want to use a middleman? Everybody knows the idea is to cut out the middleman in general, right? Well, first of all, we need to kind of look at this from a socioeconomic perspective. And what I mean by that is, folks, there are 2 types of people in this world. In case you haven't figured it out yet, you're going to be enlightened today. There's the haves and the have-nots. I think you deep down, you know that already, right? I just gave an example of that a moment ago. Remember when I worked for the state? Which one was I? Peels, beer, and popcorn? I was one of the have-nots, right? Vive la France. Now we're talking. Rule number 1, it is better to be one of the haves than one of the have-nots. In fact, I'm going to suggest that this has been the case throughout history. In fact, I'll take one particular point in history and prove it to you. let's say we get into a time machine, our DeLorean, and we go back in time, right? And we wind up at the year 1215, the year the Magna Carta was signed, from what I remember, in England, right? So we'll say this is Europe. In that case, the way this structure was set up, there were three main players. And they're listed up there. You'll never guess who the guy with the crown is over here, right? The king, the landlord, and the serf. He's the king, right, in the upper left-hand corner. The guy slouching over in the middle, we'll call him the landlord. He's doing a little work, but he's doing like the light labor. He's not killing himself, right? He's just picking things up. How about this guy in the lower left-hand corner? He's slouched over. He's pushing the plow, right? He's driving the plow. He's doing most of the heavy labor, right? He's got some animals to help him, but he's steering the thing. He's driving. Driving. Where have I heard that term before? Driving. I'll keep that on hold for a minute. The way this worked is that there were two contracts among these three players. The king basically went to this guy in the middle and said, you know what? I'm going to make you a landlord. I'm going to give you a plot of land. They called it a fiefdom back then. All I ask from you is that in times of war, that you and your workers and your sons, you join my militia, and we fight off the bad guys. Whoever's trying to attack our kingdom, you'll join my army, and you'll help me protect the women and children in the village, right? On the manor, as they call it. And in time of peace, you just do your farming, right? You live your life. In turn, the landlord went to these other people here called serfs who did not own land, and they had no choice but to hook up with people who did own land because it's an agricultural community. So the landlord would go to the serf and say, now, serf, kind of stinks to be you there, pal. What are you going to do? How are you going to survive? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Out of the goodness of my heart, I'm going to let you live on my land, and I'll let you work my land. And at harvest time, whatever you need to sustain yourself and your family, you can keep to feed yourselves. But whatever is in excess, whatever is more than what you need, you're going to turn over to me. I'm going to go sell in the marketplace, and, well, I'm going to make a lot of money. So in other words, you work hard for me, you help me get wealthy, and you get to survive. Sound familiar? Isn't that just the way it is in general? Exploitation of labor, right? Now, you should be getting angry at this point because that's the way it's been up till this point. What if we go back to the future? What if we say this structure called feudalism, which was in existence back then, what if we say, does this still exist today? Let's look at the trucking industry. Do those three players still exist? Think about it. Is there still a political authority? Yeah, we don't call him a king. I mean, on the one hand, we can call him Obama, or we could call for the industry the FMCSA as the political authority. They make the regulations. They make the rules. Okay? Check number one. What about landlords? Do landlords still exist? Oh, yeah. We call them employers. We call them carriers. We call them J.B. Hunt. What about serfs who do most of the work and make the least amount of money that drive? They don't drive plows anymore. What do they drive now? They drive trucks, right? See how it all comes together? Now, driving for a carrier is not much different. Company drivers and owner-operators are much like serfs working off of their carrier's authority. That's the structure. It's not about land in this day and age, in this respect. It's about the business license. You want to be one of the haves? It's a very simple thing. What you need to have to be a have is a business license. So either you go out and you get motor carrier authority yourself, or you get a broker license. In that case, other people will then work for you. Yes, sir. What's the benefit of having both licenses? The absolutely true benefit. Well, how about this? The first thing that you need to recognize is that when you have a motor carrier authority, you have the right to do business with shippers direct. I don't know if you all know that. You don't have to go through a broker, right? You can go directly to a shipper. The problem is that shippers very often don't want to do business with you. And the reason why is because they tend to be like movie stars. Think about it here for a second. Let's go into the movie industry, right? If I'm Steven Spielberg and I decide that I want to produce Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, number 22, whatever we're up to, right? Who do I have to have in my movie? Harrison Ford, right? He's Indiana Jones, right? So Harrison's going to come out with his cane, right? And he's going to, ooh, with his whip, right? Now, if I want Harrison in my movie, can I just pick up the phone and call Harrison? No, I got to call his agent, right? If I called Harrison, he'd say, now, Steven, I love you like a brother. We did all these movies over the years, but you know the drill. You got to call my agent, Joe, right? I don't even know if his agent's name is Joe, but I just made that up. Okay? Same thing here, right? Very often, if you're a motor carrier and you go to a shipper, hi, my name is James and I'm with ABC Trucking. Oh, no, you can't talk to me. Oh, no. You got to go talk to my agent, my broker, and he'll decide if we're going to use you. So you know what people have done, especially over the last couple of years, to essentially get through this recession? They've gotten the second license. They've cut out the middleman. Because once you do that, it opens up more doors from you. So let's try that again. Hi, my name is James from ABC Trucking. Oh, no, I can't talk to you. Turn around. Take off my carrier hat. Reach down and put on my broker hat. Hi, my name is James with XYZ Logistics. How are you? Yeah, sure. Come on in. We're talking about taking on some more brokers. Yeah, we really need help finding trucks. It's tough out there. Boom. So that answers your question. Right? Okay. Now, both freight brokers and motor carriers can deal with shippers directly without having a middleman. Is a freight broker a middleman? Of course. However, is there a middleman in between the freight broker and his shipper client? No, not unless you put one there. Why would you? I said, not unless you put one there. Why would you want to do that? I said, is there, first of all, we said, is a freight broker a middleman? And we said, yes. And then I said, is there a middleman in between the freight broker and his shipper? No, not unless he puts another broker in between them. Why would you want to do that? Right? Because then you got this guy taking a piece of the pie too. Right? If you have two brokers in the equation, usually it's called co-brokering. Co-brokering means everybody knows that there's two brokers involved. Broker number one is going to take his percentage. Broker number two is going to take his percentage. And you know what's left for the truck? After these other two hands went in the cookie jar? Crumbs. That's what's left. In which case you might not be able to find the truck. So that becomes a problem. It also becomes a problem from the perspective of the three phases, because if shipper, with respect to the payment phase, right, of the flow chart, if shipper pays broker number one and broker number one doesn't pay you, what do you still have to do? Pay the carrier. So let me get this straight. The shipper paid, the carrier got paid, and who got left holding the bag? Yeah, broker number two. It's good to be number one in the equation, broker number one, not so good to be broker number two. Okay, so you got to be very careful with that. And even when you are broker number one, how can you be held responsible for what happens with broker number two? What if he doesn't find the truck? You still got to report back to your shipper why it got all messed up. Well, didn't you arrange the transportation like I hired you to? No, I outsourced it to somebody else, and they messed it up. Well, it's the last time I used you. You just lost that client. Okay, so not a good idea. It's also known as co-brokering or double brokering in the sense that if the shipper hires a broker and then the broker hires what he thinks is the carrier, who turns out to really be an illegal broker and brokers it out to another carrier, that's double broker, right? It's kind of secret and underhanded. Okay? Double brokering, although it's not technically illegal under statutory law, there's a lot of people who frown upon it, and there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to go near it, right? So don't don't get involved in that situation because too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will. Okay? All right. Becoming a carrier or freight broker, getting the business license in terms of being one of the haves helps drivers break the bondage of serfdom, be their own boss, and make more money. There's the money. Just falls from the sky when you become a freight broker, right? Well, not quite, but let's see how life can get a little bit better. Now, a lot of people come to me and they say, instead of doing both, they say, I want to go down one path or the other to start. So they say, James, I like this workshop. This is good stuff. You're showing us about the basics, and you're telling us about being an entrepreneur. I want to be my own boss, cut out the middleman, make more money. I love that idea. Which way should I go, James? Should I be a freight broker or should I be a motor carrier? And I got to tell you that the basic idea is be one of them, right? Because you'll be one of the haves because you're a business owner. But there is a direction I prefer. The question is whether it's right for you. First of all, freight brokering is all about sales. And you need to recognize that. If you don't like sales, then you may have a problem in this business. All right? If you like just driving a truck and just doing the operations portion of it, you don't really like talking to people, then maybe you should stay driving a truck. All right? I'm not going to try to convert you into a freight broker salesman. Right, if that's the way you want to go. But you got to ask yourself these three basic questions. Number one is, what type of quality of work life do you want to have? Do you like driving a truck? You like being all around the country? I've been everywhere, man, right? You heard that song. They name all the cities, right? Hank Snow, I think was the name of the guy who wrote that song, right? I like not having a supervisor over me. Anybody ever see the movie Office Space? You ever see that movie? Funny movie, right? With the Milton and the red stapler, right? If you haven't seen that, go rent it at Blockbuster or Red, whatever the heck that name of that new one is, right? There's the supervisor that goes to this guy and over the cubicle, and just the way he communicates is so derogatory, and it's just so funny. He basically says things like, yeah, if you would do this for me, that would be great. You know, and he talks so demeaning, and the people are just like, this guy's an idiot, right? So that's the impression you get. You don't have that when you're in the truck, right? Maybe you have a dispatcher on the radio, but there's nobody hovering over you. You're not in a cubicle looking at four walls every day. You know what I look at every day when I drive a truck? I look at different city. I see Viva Las Vegas. I'm on the Strip, and the next thing you know, I'm at the Grand Canyon, right? So that's number one. Or maybe you say, you know what? I've been driving a truck all these years. I'm kind of tired of it. I'm tired of all the traffic, and I'm tired of the drivers that don't know what they're doing, the Sunday drivers that come out on Tuesday, right? I'm tired of the snow and the rain and the sleet and the weather conditions and the DOT stops and all this nonsense. I got to get out of this, right? I paid my dues. How can I use my experience to do something else? Freight broker. What if I could spend more time with my family? What if I could work from home, set up shop in my spare bedroom, my basement? Right? I got a young son now. He's 11 years old, starting to play Little League. It would be great if I could be around for his games, coach him maybe even, instead of being on Wyoming. Nothing wrong with Wyoming. Just don't want to be there. My kid's here, right? If I work from home, I could do that. Do you know what the average commute time is for a freight broker? Guess. You're working from home. 47 seconds is what your commute time is. You know why it takes that long? Because inevitably on your way from upstairs to downstairs, oh, you're going to hit a traffic jam. In the kitchen, your spouse is in front of you at the coffee pot. That's your traffic. You get downstairs 47 seconds later, you turn on your lights, you turn on your computer, you check your fax, you check your email, right? You got your little fish tank in the back, you feed your fish. I'm working, right? And you could be doing it while you're still wearing your pajamas. Guys, you don't have to shave. You're not going anywhere today. Ladies, you don't have to worry about makeup. You do your makeup later when you go to the mall to spend all the money you're making as a freight broker. How about them apples? You like apples? How about them apples? What movie is that from? All right. That's number one. Not convinced yet? Okay, let's go on to number two. Folks, you come to me and you say, James, you're a consultant, right? I'll say, yep. You can help me set up a trucking company, right? Yep. All right, let's do it. You don't ask me if it's a good idea, especially within the last couple of years. If you ask me, I'd have to tell you the truth. Are you out of your mind? You're going to invest all this money, buy trucks, and you're going to buy insurance, plates, permits? Are you going to go out into a recession where there's not enough freight? You're going to lose your money. But if you tell me you're doing it, then I stand at attention. I say, yes, sir, I'll get you your motor carrier authority. If we're going to set you up, you know what we need to do? Hold on to your hat, because here we go. We got to get your truck. We got to make sure we insure that truck. We got to make sure that you get $1 million on 100,000 cargo. We got to make sure that we plate your truck, not just in the state where you're based if you're over 26,000 pounds, but we need to make sure we plate your truck through each and every state that you're going to go through the apportioned plate IRP, International Registration Plan program. And if you're going to pay the states once, it's not going to stop there. Oh, no, you're going to pay the states quite a few times because you got to pay for your IFTA sticker as well, which is your fuel tax. You're going to pay all that on a quarterly basis, right? You got to do your trip sheets. You got to make sure you keep up with your mileage. And, of course, there are 4 states that's not enough money for them from you. They don't want to charge you for fuel a second time, except they call it a mileage tax. New York, Kentucky, Oregon, and New Mexico. Then we got to talk about how you got to get your federal operating authority. Remember interstate authority? Oh, by the way, there's a second stage to that, which I didn't tell you, and that is registering your federal authority with each of the states that you're going to go through, called the UCR program, Unified Carrier Registration, which used to be called single state registration. It's just another darn way to tax truckers, okay? And if that's not enough, then we got to talk about intrastate authority for your state. You're in New York? Well, you got to have New York authority as well. Right? Don't even think about going down to Texas and doing Dallas, Houston, unless you have Texas state authority. It doesn't stop there. Now we got to talk about driver compliance. Got to make sure that you keep driver qualification files on all drivers, including yourself. If you're the only driver that drives, you need to make sure that you properly drug test your drivers, right? Got to make sure that you test your drivers at the time of hire as well as randomly. If you are the only driver that works for your own one-man company, you still have to randomly drug test yourself. Huh? Now, let me get this straight. Now, we're going to call ourselves for a top secret drug test next Tuesday, but we're not going to tell ourselves. How does that work? You got to join a consortium, and they call, right? Got to make sure your drivers are medically qualified, physically qualified. You got to check the driver abstracts from the Department of Motor Vehicles for any state that they've had a CDL. Got to contact their last employer and get the rating from them. You got to make sure that your driver follows the hours of service regulations. You got to audit their logbooks. If you don't audit them, DOT is going to come in and they're going to audit them. And if there's violations, you're going to get fines. They're going to stop you on the side of the road, the DOT, at the way stations. Remember? Because I used to stop you back in 1994. Remember that, right? They're going to make sure that you are regularly inspecting, maintaining, and repairing your vehicle. Repairs cost money, and so on and so forth. I'm rambling off here just to illustrate how ridiculous it is to own and operate a motor carrier business. How entailed it is. There's a book that they give you when you first start out. You want to be a carrier, huh? Okay, here you go. That's the regulation book. Oh, by the way, I just need you to sign this form so I can give you a DOT number, and you're basically promising that you're going to read the whole darn thing, and you're going to make sure that you comply with every single aspect of it. We're going to come back 90 days and do an audit and make sure you are. Do you know I used to enforce that book, and I don't know half of what's in that book? Nobody could know. What are you going to do, sit up on a Friday night and read the darn book after you worked all day? I don't think so. Right? It's unreasonable. It's overregulated. It's overtaxed. Pay too much money. Yeah? Now they're focusing in on brokers, by the way, which we're trying to haul off. Now they're trying to do the same thing, where they want brokers to register annually in this new bill that we're fighting. Register annually. We already register annually because we have to do UCR too. You pay $76 to the government every year. That's your registration. Why would you make me register a second time? That doesn't make any sense. What the heck is that? So we're trying to thwart that. But for now, if you don't go down the motor carrier path and you want to go down the freight broker path, you know how many regulations there are? 7. Notwithstanding, you have to get a license and a bond, the actual meat and potatoes of the regulations that govern freight brokers, 7. You know what they say? Please don't bribe anybody. Don't try to pay off your shippers, your traffic managers. No conflict of interest. You can't be both the broker and the shipper, although you can be both the broker and the carrier. If you're going to operate 2 businesses, whether it's motor carrier or something else, dry cleaning business, don't commingle your funds. You got to keep your accounts separate. Separate books, QuickBooks, separate bank accounts. That's it. Pretty much it. It's basic stuff. Don't lie, steal, and rob, right? Not convinced yet? Okay. Number 3, the basic economic issue. How many loads can you haul in a day when you're a motor carrier? I guess it depends on where you're going from and to, right? What if you're going across the country? How many loads can you haul in a day as an independent owner-operator going from New York to California? What's the answer? Less than 1. It's in decimals. 0.3? 0.3 loads. 0.27? Something like that. How many loads can you book in a day? How many sales can you close in a day? How many phone calls can you make in an 8-hour day? What constitutes a day? How many hours are in a day? I'm a new entrepreneur. I just set up my trucking authority. I'm going to go from New York to California. I'm going to be like a taxi driver. You know what taxi drivers are like, right? They want to pick up somebody, drop them off, get money, go race to the next place, right? Pick them up, race to the next place, right? Do as much as you can, make as much money as you can. I'm going to be like that with trucking. I'm going to get in my truck in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm going to Los Angeles, and I'm going to drive 16 hours straight. Can I do that? Why? Yeah. Hours of service regulations. You can't drive more than 11 hours following 10 consecutive off-duty hours. The DOT shuts you down. Unless you have a second logbook. Right? I mean, we know about that. Okay. If I want to work 16 hours nonstop from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, 18 hours. In the basement of my home, just pump myself with coffee every 2 hours, right? Can I? Yeah. Who's going to stop me? There's no regulation. There's no safety issue. I can understand you're operating an 80,000-pound semi filled with diesel fuel. Fall asleep at the wheel, that might be a problem, right? Kill some people. School bus filled with kids next to you. Who am I going to hurt in my office? If I fall asleep at my computer, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I might slip and inadvertently get a paper cut. That's it. Right? No danger there. Do what you want to do. You're an entrepreneur. Right? The more you work, the more money you make. It's your business. That's the name of the game. So which way should you go? I don't know. You tell me. Average broker commission is 12.5% over the last 20 years, as reported by one of the schools out in Arizona. That's not bad. 12.5% off each load. How many loads can you book in a day? So on and so forth. Now, I'm going to show you a strategy today that is going to enable you to make anywhere from 15% worst case scenario up to 28%. Anything more than that, you're probably ripping somebody off. I'm not going to show you how to rip anybody off. All right? You're either ripping the shipper off, or the carrier off, or both. Now, some of you are coming from the trucking industry here, and I can see the anger. I can feel the mane coming up on the back of your neck. The hair's, what do you mean you're going to show us how to make 28%? The question becomes, what is the amount of percentage that is an acceptable amount of percentage for the broker to earn on a load to the truck? Now, for those of you who are in trucking, I'm going to ask you point blank, what percentage is the right amount? Said another way, what is the maximum percentage that you would be willing to pay your broker if you were truly in control of the scenario? What's the appropriate amount? What do you think's fair? What percentage? 25%? Okay, that's kind of high. What about other people? 20%? Oh, you guys, I like you guys. You guys are going to be brokers with me. Yeah. That's not the trucker mentality, though. Huh? What I'm asking is, if you're a carrier and you're currently taking loads from brokers, no matter what the broker's telling you, because it's probably half lies, right? If they told you the truth, right? I don't think you can handle the truth, but what movie is that from, right? If they told you the truth and they said, okay, I'm going to give you a load and I'm making X percentage, what is the maximum percentage that they would say that they're making that you would be okay with, that you could stomach? No more than 10. Okay, that's the usual answer that I get, okay? And I got to tell you, the 10% is usually a finder's fee in business in general. Like, for instance, if you came to me, it's not a commission, it's a finder's fee. It's less than a commission, right? So I'm going to disagree with you over whether that's appropriate amount, right? But I understand that that is the trucker mentality, that's where most people come from. If I wanted to broker a transaction, so to speak, between you as an up-and-coming freight broker and, let's say, one of the members of my trade group, right? I know a lot of brokers. I'm president of trade group, right? So it turns out that I have a mid-sized broker who wants to go out of business. He's tired. He's retiring. He's going to go and hang out in Paris, right? So he says, I want to put my brokerage up for sale. I want to sell my MC number. It's an old MC number. I want to make sure that that my book of business is taken care of and it's valuable because it's a nice accounts, right? Money-making accounts. Here's my annual revenue. We're going to do a valuation of what the business is worth, right? We go through that whole thing. They say, James, I want you to find me a buyer. So you want me to find a seller, and he wants me to find a buyer. Bingo! All I got to do is match the two of you up, right? And I'm going to take a cut. I'm going to take a commission. What should that be? Probably a finder's fee. This is different. This is brokering, and that you're getting a commission off of the actual load. Now, the problem is that we want to make as much money as we can as brokers to a point where we recognize we don't want to cross an ethical line, and the truck doesn't want us to make any money at all. And in fact, the truck doesn't even like us. Does the truck really like brokers? No. Why? Because they take too much money. They're not very nice, they think. Right? All sorts of different reasons, but it's basically about money. So the problem becomes all about whether you can agree on the amount of commission, and you're never going to be able to agree. Brokers' mentality, brokers' philosophy, perspective mix with carriers about as good as oil and water in the Gulf of Mexico. You know what happened down there. That doesn't work out too good. That's a disaster. So that's a problem, and we have to recognize that. Now, by the end of the day, I guarantee you that you are all going to think like brokers, because I'm going to brainwash you. Brainwashing is in progress, right? Be advised, right? By the end of the day, you're going to adopt, I'm sure, my perspective, which is totally different. You see, the carrier says, I'm willing to pay my broker 10% to find me a load. Boy, do you have it backwards. You're not paying me. I'm paying you. Okay? Now, hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. Why is there a need for brokers? Carriers need loads. Shippers need carriers. Can they get together themselves? They can, but they simply don't. And again, it has to do with the fact that shippers prefer to work with brokers, and people are typically lazy. This guy represents, in the upper right-hand corner, sitting on the chair there with his feet up, he represents your average traffic manager employee at a shipper. He doesn't own the company. He's not going to be doing 18 hours a day. He's going to do his little 8 hours a day. He's going to collect his pay, and he's going to do just enough work to make sure that when his boss comes down, he doesn't get fired. All right? Employees screw around all the time. You know what he's doing right now? He's on Facebook posting his status about where he went to dinner last night for his friends. He's not working. So here you come in as the freight broker, and you knock on his door and you say, hey, boy, do I have a deal for you. How about, you know how you're supposed to do your job and arrange for transportation? How about you outsource that to me? I'm an independent business person. I'll do all the work. You continue to collect your salary, and your job becomes not to do the work, but to coordinate with me as I do the work. That sounds pretty good. In fact, you don't even have to get up. Keep your feet up on the table. Right? He also represents your average owner-operator. Now, make no mistake, I don't like to bust on owner-operators because owner-operators have sent me all over the nation, if not all over the world. Right? I make a lot of money off of owner-operators. But what upsets me is that when I take an owner-operator, and think about the chart that we were looking at before, he went from company driver, he became owner-operator, he met me at a truck show, and I said, hey, why don't you get your own authority? He does, and you know what he does? Just after he just cut out the middleman, the carrier that he was leased onto, you know what the next thing is he does? He brings back into the equation another middleman. You know who it is this time? Not the carrier. It's a freight broker. He has his own authority. He has the right to do business with Shippers Direct. He has the right to get a freight broker license as well, but he chooses not to. He goes on to getloaded.com or truckstop.com, load board. He takes all his loads off the load board. Who's posted on the load board? Freight brokers, most of the time. So in other words, he didn't really do himself justice, did he? He just substituted one middleman for another. Now, good news for you because you're going to become freight brokers. That is why industry statistics show that 55% of all shipments, you might want to write that down, 55% of all shipments transported in highway mode, trucking, go through freight brokers. 55%, more than half, use a broker. While freight brokers themselves are middlemen, they succeed because both carriers and shippers need and regularly use them, and because they're not lazy. They are go-getters. Brokers do not eat until and unless they pick up the phone and close sales. If carriers can't find loads, they will always prefer a brokered load on the backhaul rather than deadheading. For the couple of people in the room that are not in trucking, we got to define some terms there, make sure everybody's on the same page. What do we mean by backhaul? Yeah, front haul is the way out, right, or line haul, and back haul is the way back. What do we mean by deadheading? Is that a reference to the Grateful Dead? Huh? All right, so operating the vehicle empty. When you move the vehicle and there's no freight on board, you're not getting paid to move it, you're losing money. Costs money to operate the vehicle. Fuel, wear and tear, all that kind of stuff, maintenance. What's rule number one in trucking? If you move, you need to get paid, right? Minimize deadhead. I'd like to say eliminate, but that's not realistic. Minimize your deadhead miles. That's rule number one in trucking. If that's rule number one in trucking, what do you suppose rule number one in freight brokering is? Got any idea? It's very simple. Well, part of your procedure, yeah. But I'm going to suggest rule number one in brokering is no rule number one in trucking. Why do truckers do business with brokers? You need to understand their motivation, and you need to capitalize on their motivation. Didn't we just say a minute ago that most truckers don't like brokers? Well, then if that's the case, why in the world would you voluntarily do business with brokers? Why would you do business with somebody you don't like? Doesn't make any sense. There's only one reason. Yeah, it's about money, right? A broker is the lesser of two evils. There's only one thing worse than a broker from most carriers' perspective. You know what that is? Deadheading. So let me get this straight. I can either make a little money from my broker or I can make no money. Which one am I going to choose? obviously. Successful brokers look for desperate carriers willing to accept a backhaul rate as less is better than nothing. Doesn't sound too nice, does it? Desperate. Welcome to Freight Brokering 101, where you learn how to exploit, manipulate, cheat, steal, and rob from carriers. No, that's not what we're doing here. Now, we got to turn this around. Makes me feel bad when I say that. Desperate carriers. Let's put it in a different perspective. What if it was 2 o'clock in the morning last night, right? And what if you woke up at exactly 2, you're home in bed, right, in your bedroom, asleep. You open your eyes at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you see a big, thick cloud of smoke in your room, in your bedroom. You start to have difficulty breathing. You start to choke. What's going on? There's fire. There's fire in your bedroom. So if there's a fire in your bedroom, then you get the heck out, right? So what do? You wake up your spouse. You go and you grab the kids. You get the puppy dog. You might leave your mother-in-law in the basement, but all the important people, you get out of the house. You got to excuse, I'm going to have some mother-in-law jokes throughout the day. So, you know what I like about my mother-in-law? My mother-in-law is now my ex-mother-in-law. Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm just kidding. I used to like my ex-mother-in-law. Just part of the script. Especially if she's listening to the recording after the fact, right? Okay. All right, now. Desperate. What's the second thing you do when you get everybody out safely? Pick up your phone and you dial 911. And why do you do that? Is it because Shorty's on the dance floor, or huh? You're doing it because you want. She's like, he didn't just go there, right? No, he didn't say that, right? All right. Who shows up next? The fire department, the guys with the big red truck that put out the fire, right? All right, let's wrap this whole thing up here. So the point is that you're calling for help, right? And people come and help you. Guess what? A freight broker is emergency rescue personnel for the trucking industry. Whoa, isn't that different? That's much better than desperate carriers, right? Look at it this way. You're an independent owner-operator, right? You're on your way from Atlanta, Georgia to Dallas, Texas, and there you are. You're getting close to Dallas. You see the sign now approaching Dallas-Fort Worth, right? You're happier than a pig, and you know what, because you're going to go take a shower and you're going to relax, and then all of a sudden you smell it. What's that? You smell smoke, right? Can somebody shut that door for me? You smell smoke. Now, it's not real smoke. It's metaphorical smoke, right? I'm just trying to make a point. If it were real smoke, it would be a fire. But this is the smoke associated with you realizing that you're in trouble. You know why? Because you know what you forgot? Yeah, you forgot to load on the backhaul. So here you are going from Atlanta, Georgia to Dallas, Texas. You're making $1.40 a mile, and now you're about to go back empty. If you come back empty, what did you make a mile? Some people do the math and they say 70 cents. What's the real answer? Nothing, because your fuel ate into your profits. You can't afford to go back empty. You've got to have a load. You've got to get paid to go back, right? So at that point in time, you realize there's a fire in your business, and who do you call? Don't say Ghostbusters. Yeah, right. Deadhead Busters, right? Ooh, that's a good name for a company. I got to remember that. Deadhead Busters. Okay. And who answers the phone when you dial the equivalent of 911? Thank you for calling Excelsior Logistics. This is James. What's your emergency? Right? Now, doesn't that make you feel better? Because you're helping the trucker, right? Avoid a catastrophic situation. You're also helping the shipper. All the freight is piling up on the dock, right? And in that case, here you come, you help him get that freight off before his supervisor comes down and yells at him. Last thing he wants to hear is, you better get this stuff off the dock or I'll find somebody who will, right? And who else are you helping besides the trucker and the shipper as a third person? you're helping yourself. Are you a volunteer firefighter in this industry? Oh, no. You get paid to put out fires. Much better? Now we can sleep at night, right? Okay. All right. Now, let's go on to the next session here real quick. Setting up your business. All right. Now, I usually spend a lot of time on this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, number one, because we're running short on time based on where we are at this point. And number two, because I don't really want to emphasize doing it this way. Usually I say, if you want to set up a freight brokerage, go get yourself incorporated, get an LLC set up, a limited liability company, because the main goal should be ultimately down the road to protect your personal assets. When you operate as an individual, in that case, then you are susceptible to lawsuits against you individually, meaning all of your personal assets are up for grabs. You can lose your home, your car, your personal bank account, right? All your assets, stocks, retirement, all that kind of stuff. So keep in mind that that's typically the issue. Right now, because of where we are in the industry, it's about getting your license now because you don't want to miss the boat. So what I recommend that you do, unless you're ready to get a corporation set up immediately, usually people say, oh, well, I got to figure out a name for my corporation. Then I got to go check and see if it's available. Then I got to figure out how I'm going to file. Am I going to go try to do it myself with the Department of State? Or am I going to go through a service, an attorney, right? And they usually take a lot of time. 2 weeks goes by, 6 weeks goes by, and they haven't done it. In 6 weeks, it's going to be too late to miss the holiday rush. You know, you're going to miss the holiday rush. So what I'm recommending to people right now is go get the license under your own name. John Doe, then you get the license as John Doe. 3 weeks later, you'll have your license. If you go through us, we'll get you a license because we do electronic filings. Once you have your license, then start the process of converting it over. But at that point, you're up and running. You're doing business, right? And in that case, within 3 months, you could switch it over for $14. You could switch it over to a corporation. Not a big deal, okay? I do recommend that you set up a corporation. So read through this stuff when you get a chance here as far as the differences between sole proprietor, right? There's Lucy, remember her, right? She was a sole proprietor with her little counseling shop, right? And ultimately, you can go into business with somebody else as a partnership. Don't do that, because what that does is it exposes you to even more risk. Not only are you liable for your own activities, but you're liable personally for your partner's activities, right? Your partner goes out and kills somebody with a truck, assuming that you're operating in the trucking industry. In that case, then next thing you know, you're getting sued because of his activities. You didn't drive the truck, but you're his partner. So not good. If you want to go into partnerships with somebody, form a corporation. And in that case, you'll both be equal shareholders, and you do it that way. That way, you're under the protection of corporate shield, as they call it, right? When you set up a corporation, what you're doing is you are actually creating another person in the eyes of the law. And that person, even though it's not a real person, that person then acquires its own assets, liabilities. If that person does business and something goes wrong, it's that person that gets sued, not you individually, okay? Corporations go on and on. They never die until they're dissolved by their owners. So you can pass your corporation down, right, from one generation to the next. There are basically two different types of corporations, what we call C Corps and S Corps. You need to know the distinction. A C Corp is a main business corporation, and an S Corp is a small business corporation. If you have fewer than 500 employees, which I'm sure you all will as you start your freight brokerage, in that case you qualify for an S Corp. I highly recommend you think about doing this because you will save money on taxes. I won't go into detail about this, but just trust me here. When you are a C Corp, the corporation pays taxes to the IRS on its business income. That same money gets passed down to the owners of the corporation through dividends, and you're taxed on that money a second time. Why would you want to pay taxes twice? That's no good. S Corporation, the corporation does not pay taxes. You're only taxed one time at an individual level on your 1040 return. So talk to your accountant about that as to C versus S, but S will save you money on taxes, okay? All you got to do is go to the IRS to ultimately to request S Corp status. So you're going to the Department of State in your state to get the corporation filed, and then you go to the federal government, the IRS, you file Form 2553, IRS Form 2553, and in that case they will give you S status. You then file evidence of S status with your state tax department, and then you don't pay federal business income taxes. Very nice thing. 2553, yes sir. Limited liability companies are similar to corporations, except there's some